Mrs. Ginn here again. This is lesson 16. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using distributive property and inverse properties to solve for equivalent expressions. Remember that an expression is anything that has a variable in it. And we're going to basically be simplifying these expressions so that they equal each other, but they're easier to read. So I'll dive in, and I'm sure it'll make a little bit more sense as we go. But we're basically using our number properties from the very beginning of the unit to solve for these. Here's the first example. So I have -5 times the quantity 4x minus 9. What I'm going to do is use the distributive property to distribute the -5 to the 4 and to the 9. When I do this, I get -5 times 4, which is -20x. The x stays there. And then when I get negative times a negative, I get a positive, and that's going to be 5 times 9, which is 45. Notice here, if we were to solve this for 2, okay, if x were to equal 2, we would then plug in 2 plus 45, and you would get -40 plus 45. We're -$40 in our bank account, and we put 45 in, we're going to get a +5. Well, if you haven't already made the connection that these are similar, if we plug in 2 over here, -20 times 2 plus 45, we get -40 plus 45, which also gets us a result of 5. So if you've noticed, these are both equal to each other. The only difference between them is that the -5 has been distributed in on this side. The -5 has been distributed out on that side. So here, this is the first example of how we can have equivalent expressions that are algebraic. Here is another example, now getting into a little bit more difficult of an example. X minus 2 over 3. So in the first expression, the quantity x minus 2 is divided by 3. So we're going to now write this as multiplication instead of division. The way to do this is to change the 3 on the bottom into a fraction. So instead of having divided by 3, we're going to have the quantity x minus 2 multiplied by 1/3. This has the same effect. If you're multiplying by a fraction, it's just like dividing by the whole number. So in this case now, we can distribute in the 1/3, and we get 1/3 x minus, because they're still negative, 1/3 times 2. Well, 1/3 times 2 we know to be 2/3, so we can then rewrite this as 1/3 x minus 2/3. When we are looking at this, now we have to come to terms. We have to figure out how many terms do we have and what is the coefficient of x. So first of all, for terms, remember that that is just one unit, and they're usually separated by addition. In this case, they're separated by subtraction. Remember, we can also rewrite subtraction as addition. So this can become 1/3 x plus a -2/3. They have the same answer. They have the same purpose there. It's just the additive inverse. So there are 2 terms in this case because we have 1/3 x and we have -2/3. Those are both the terms. But the coefficient of x comes before x. So in this case, the coefficient is not -2/3, it's 1/3. Okay, you're going to need to be able to do this in your homework. You're going to need to be able to simplify using these steps. So I use distributive and additive inverses, and then find the terms and find the coefficients. I'll do a few more examples. Here's another one. This one now has both an x and a y. So there may be a couple steps with this one. But the first step, remember, is to make it into multiplication. And in order to do that, to get the 4 out of the bottom, we multiply by a fraction. So we're going to take the quantity x plus 2y minus 8 and we're going to simply multiply by 1/4. Now that we have it as multiplication, we can do the distributive property. We take the 1/4 and we distribute it to all 3 terms. Notice how I put that in there early. And that now becomes 1/4.
If I could have your attention, please, the fire suppression system.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to put the last video with this video. Sorry about that. The fire alarms haven't gone off yet, so just like at school, if they go off, disregard. I'm gonna keep teaching. I'm gonna keep going through the material today. So we were just looking here, and I just want to review quickly. Remember that there was 4 on the bottom, so we made it into multiplication, and by taking it times 1/4. Now we're distributing that 1/4 over. So when we distribute, we get 1/4 x. We know that 2 times 1/4 is the same as 1/2 because it's 2 over 4. I'll break that down for you and go 2/4 for right now. Y, and there's going to be an addition in between because they're adding 2y. And then we have a subtraction 8/4. Okay? Now we can kind of reduce. Let's go ahead and reduce these things. So we have 1/4 x plus 1/2 y minus 2, because 8 divided by 4 is 2. In this case, how many terms do we have? 3. 1, 2, 3. If you catch in the other video, I say that at the beginning as a hint. And now we have 2 coefficients. We have a coefficient for x and we have a coefficient for y. The coefficient for x is 1/4 and the coefficient for y is 1/2. So this is another example of something that you would need to be doing in your homework. They're going to give you something just like that. And you're going to start with it and finish with the terms and the coefficients. A couple more, because I think lots of examples are good. So I'm going to go over 2 more, and then we'll be done, and you guys can get started on your homework. First thing we do here, distributive property. Distribute that 3 in, so we end up with 3x minus 3 times 4, which is 12y. How many terms do we have? This one's super easy. There's 2 terms. You can't combine these, guys. One's an x and one's a y, so don't try to combine them. I can see you trying to do that. Don't do that. Coefficient of x is 3. Coefficient of y is negative 12. Make sure that negative is there. I think we missed that on the last problem. Anytime you have subtraction, you got to think of the additive inverse, okay? So that is the true answer, negative 12. All right, this one, that was an easy one. I figured you guys would probably get that one. This one's a little more difficult. Remember that it's a division, so we have to come up with a multiplication problem for this. What I want to do first, and I'm referring to my book here quickly because I have an idea on how I would think to do this, but I want to look and see how they do it, just real quick. Okay, good. Okay, so my idea is good and valid. We will do it this way. Rather than even making it into a fraction and multiplying and distributing, I just take the x and I put it to both terms. So if I separated this out, okay, I would get x squared over x plus 2x over x. And then if you remember a long time ago, not too long, but we went over these properties for exponents and rules, I guess, for exponents. And when we had 2 numbers to an exponent and they were being divided with the same base, we could subtract them. So x is basically x to the 1, and x are the same. They have the same base. So what we can do is we can take 2 minus 1, and we're left with, we have 2 minus 1, we're left with x. So the 2 basically becomes non-existent because of that rule. Again, that's the rule for exponents, division, if you want to look it up and check in. I think I remember it was like this, and it equals this, something like that. It's one of the rules. Now, this one doesn't have the same base necessarily, but if we divided an x by an x, they cancel. So we get a final answer of x plus 2. And yes, that's what the book says. So my way is just fine. Sometimes, my way is not the way the book goes with the book, so I like to double check. X plus 2 is your final answer. How many terms? 2. Only one coefficient, and you're probably thinking, well, there isn't one. There actually is. Remember that even if x stands alone, it's always multiplied by 1. So 1 is the coefficient of x. Alrighty. If there's any questions, again, please reach out. You can email me, or I'll see you on the Zoom.